there are different types of horror movies. What usually comes to people's minds when the phrase horror movie, is said is, the typical slasher film or films like that where there is a person or a monster or a ghost or whatever that's chasing and killing people and the characters have to escape from it. That kind of horror. There is the way it's done. Is it really gory? Is it more what you don't see? Is it, torture porn? Do they show the deaths a lot or do they leave it off camera? That sort of thing. And then, there's horror that blends with other genres. There's like action-oriented horror, where there's a lot of, kinetic fight scenes or action scenes, but the overall tone is still horror. There's the horror comedy where it's a horror movie but there's a lot of jokes and stuff in it. And then there's the more slow, atmospheric kind of horror that has this building creep of dread that starts at the beginning of the movie and slowly builds to something more menacing and just awful as time builds on and gets more in your head and things like that. Hereditary is that kind of film, the last kind. The more of a slow build horror movie that relies a lot on atmosphere, cinematography, and it also is the type of horror in this movie is very ingrained into the characters themselves. There's a lot of family drama and a lot of grief, a lot of horrible things in these people's lives, and the horror comes from that. And that's probably the reason why you've heard that Hereditary is such a great, sophisticated movie, because it goes for horror where it actually really comes from, in reality. And it's very psychological and emotional. And that's what director Ari Aster was going for with this movie, and he achieved it spectacularly with Hereditary. Now, you've probably also heard that Hereditary is like the scariest movie ever, or the scariest movie since The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, and it definitely is that type of horror movie. It comes from that same family of horror films, and it does have its scary moments. I will admit, me personally, since I see movies like this all the time, I wasn't really particularly scared by Hereditary necessarily, because I guess maybe I've been desensitized to stuff like this. But I did recognize from an artistic and critical perspective that I was watching something that was very artfully and thoughtfully and well done. Now, let's just talk about the plot. The plot stars Toni Collette as the main character. She's the mother in a family. She's married. Her husband is played by Gabriel Byrne. They have 2 kids, one older son and then one really younger daughter. And she has a mother, and her mother dies before the movie opens. And her mother was, she didn't have a very good relationship with her mother. She loved her, but, they didn't get along all the time. Her mother had a history of mental illness, which runs in their family. And her mother was into some really secretive, private rituals and things like that. And all I'll say is the history of mental illness in the family and her mother's very secret, strange, spiritual life definitely play a part in where all the horror in this movie comes from. And the mother's death sets everything in motion in this movie. And anything more that I say will be giving it away, but that's basically the setup. And what Hereditary does is it takes the grief that the family is feeling because of that stems from the mother's death, the grandmother's death, and then things that the characters do and how it affects the rest of the family. It's a very personal kind of horror movie, which I think is where it gets most of its power. Another place it gets its power from is the cinematography by Ari Aster. This movie is very beautifully, very well shot. I am an aspiring filmmaker and videographer. I'm a videographer, that's my day job, but I always want to get better. And so when I was watching this movie, I was really admired his use of natural light, shot composition, color tone, and I like the fact that the scares in this movie, they weren't necessarily jump scares exactly, but they felt very organic and they were well shot, and they came from a place of, I felt, realism, psychological realism. And it was almost like sometimes the scary things, you don't notice it at first, you have to be looking for it. The same way in real life. If something's scary in a room with you, if you're busy doing something, you might not see it because you're focused on what you're doing, but once you really look and see it, it's like, oh my God, there's something horrible in this room with me. And I felt like his skill, the director's skill, or whoever he hired as his DP or whatever, the cinematography, the level of skill and attention to detail to make that happen was just fantastic. Now, the only big drawback to Hereditary, in my opinion, is that it's a slow burn horror movie. If you're someone with a short attention span or who's used to horror movies that have a lot of more jump scares and are more visceral, with someone with an axe coming out, things like that really soon, This may be a hard movie for you to sit through because it's definitely more sophisticated, highbrow horror, and it does take its time to get to a place. It builds, it starts slow, and then it builds to this horrific, very visceral ending at the end, but you have to wait to get there. But it's worth it. The performances, all the actors in this movie are top class, stellar. You know, Gabriel Byrne and Toni Collette are veteran actors. They're very good at their roles. Toni Collette is the main character, and she deserves to be the main character because she's a top-notch actress. She does a very great job with this role. Powerhouse performance as the grieving, beleaguered, desperate mother who also has, you know, mental illness things going on and who doesn't have a good relationship with a lot of people in her family. But, you know, she still loves them but doesn't always do things great or whatever. She does a great, great job. But anyways, I do recommend seeing Hereditary if you're a fan of horror or a fan of very artistically done horror movies, because I thought it was really well done. Thank you for watching. If you like this movie, please like it on YouTube and subscribe to the channel because I appreciate your viewership, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!